there. My name is Sheena Iyengar, and I'm here to talk with all of us about how we can think bigger. Now, I'm blind, and there's going to be times in the next 25 minutes when I'm going to ask you questions, and I'm going to ask you to call out your answers. So are you ready? Say yes. Thank you. See, I'm blind, so you have to talk really loud. All right, we're going to start with one of my favorite big ideas.
Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that Twin Cities frame. Keep, ancient lands, your storied pomp, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my light beside the golden door. Emma Lazarus.
Lady Liberty, our colossal mother of exiles who welcomes the yearning masses to her golden threshold, is without doubt a really big idea. She isn't just a statue, but she stood for an idea: freedom, hope, and opportunity. No matter who you are, no matter where you're from, you know her, and you believe in what she says to you, which is that as long as you believe in yourself, you can make any dream come true. Where did this idea come from? That's the question I'm going to answer. More generally, where do big ideas come from? Who has them, and how do they get them? Thanks to recent advances in neuro and cognitive sciences, we can answer that question today. We know how the mind creates its best ideas. Think Bigger takes advantage of that knowledge. It's a method, it's a toolkit by which anyone is enabled to create meaningful choices to solve complex problems. So I'm going to start by telling you how Bartholdi got the idea for Lady Liberty. Now here's Bartholdi. You know, when you hear the story told of people like Bartholdi, it's always a hero's journey. It's always somebody who had vision, who had passion, who pursued his or her dream against all the odds, made the impossible possible, overcame so many obstacles to achieve their dreams. And certainly Bartholdi's story is no different. After all, he had to work really hard to build Lady Liberty, first in France, then get her over to the United States, collect all the money, build the pedestal upon which she stands. It's a wonderful story of triumph, and we love it. But did you ever notice that in those stories, they never tell you how the person got the idea? They never tell you that part. And if you ask, where does the idea actually come from? It's as if it was magic. You know, it was the magic that inspired the apple to fall on the right head. It was magic that led you to have that divine revelation that came within your dreams or when you reached the top of the mountain. Or it was the magic that hits the special person who has the special mind. And because they have a special mind, the idea just comes to them through a creative ether. Well, I'm here to tell you that Bartholdi didn't have magic to get his idea, and neither do you. So now let me tell you the other version of the story, which is exactly how did he get his idea? Not the other stuff, just the idea. He was born in France. His father died when he was 2, and so his mother moved him to Paris, where he was immersed in art. He grew up learning all about art, and in particular sculpture, and when he was a young man, he was selected to join a group of people who were sent to Egypt. And there, he was captivated by the colossal statues guarding the Egyptian tombs. In fact, his very first proposal, submission of an art piece that he wanted to create, was for the Suez Canal. He wanted to create a giant lady dressed in robes carrying a light to Asia. But instead, they decided to build a normal lighthouse, which is what stands there today. But that thought was there in his mind. Well, while he was building Lady Liberty, there was a very famous painting that was hanging in Museo d'Orsay. It was a painting by Levève, La Vérité, the Lady of Truth. Notice the pose. Well, what about Libertas? After all, we're not talking about the Lady of Truth, we're talking about Lady Liberty. Where does the Libertas come from? The Romans. In fact, it was probably jingling in his pocket on a 5-franc coin. After all, the French were enamored of enamored of Libertas. Take a look at the 5-franc coin. Now, what about the face of Lady Liberty? There's so many poems written about that face. Whose face was it? The most important woman in his life was his mother. And when he was asked if that was the face of his mother, he did not deny it. Now let's put the pieces together. The giant sculptures guarding the ancient Egyptian tombs, plus La Vérité, plus Libertas, plus the face of his mother. It wasn't magic. He took pieces that were familiar, that were appealing to him, and he combined them in a way that was unforgettable for the world. You know, all innovation is nothing more and nothing less than a new combination of existing elements, and yet we all know that not all combinations are equal. Even as I say and tell you about the pieces he put together, you yourself are saying, no, but there's something really special about the combination he created. And you're exactly right. The great innovations are where the whole is greater than the mere sum of the parts. Think Bigger unpacks how we create those special combinations, how we use research, analysis, experience, and judgment to create those combinations. Now take a look at this painting and tell me who made this. Just call out if you have a guess. Anybody know? No. Van Gogh? No. What about this one? Picasso, yes? In fact, both of them were made by Picasso. 1901 versus 1907. What was it that led to this transformation in just 6 years? Was it magic? I'm going to tell you, no, it wasn't magic. We can track the change that happened to him. So during the 1800s into the early 1900s, there was a technology that came into being that disrupted the art world. Anyone know what that technology was? It was a disruption. All the artists were really disturbed. Anyone know what that technology was? Just call out. It was the camera. Look at these quotes from people at that time. Does it sound familiar to some of the things we're saying about AI today? From today, painting is dead. The camera will supplant art altogether. In fact, as we now know from history, art is not dead. Maybe making a portrait is dead, but art is not dead. If anything, it gave rise to new forms of art, like Impressionism. It made artists see the ordinary in extraordinary ways, not to mention the fact that it gave rise to new forms of art, like photography. Well, Picasso was schooled in realism, so he was struggling to figure out how to create something of value, given that the camera had hijacked realism. In 1906, he was invited by Gertrude Stein to her salon, and there he beheld the painting by Matisse, The Joy of Life. Matisse himself was influenced by his own mentor, Cezanne, Five Bathers. And so Picasso's mesmerized by this painting, and he asked Gertrude Stein to arrange a meeting. He meets Matisse at a cafe. And when Matisse meets him at a cafe, he brings along with him an African sculpture that he just recently procured from one of the African colonies. It is said that throughout their meeting, Picasso held that African sculpture the entire time, and he kept fingering the lines and the angles of that African sculpture. And that very night, his roommate reports that he was painting La Demoiselle d'Avignon. Take a look at this, the influences of Matisse and the African sculpture, and now we have the birth of Cubism. His contemporary, T.S. Eliot, once quipped, "Immature poets imitate, mature poets steal." So was Picasso a thief? Or was he like any innovator, whether it be an artist, a scientist, or an entrepreneur, who simply collects diverse and distant elements and combines them in a new and meaningful way? As Newton once quipped to one of his peers, "If I have seen further, it is because I have stood on the shoulder of giants." In Think Bigger, we define innovation as a useful, emphasis on the word useful, novel combination of existing ideas that come together to solve for a complex problem, emphasis on the word problem. So let me show you how this works in practice. Let me give you another example, and this time I'm going to take it apart piece by piece, and as I show you how this innovation happened, I'm going to use the very language that we use for training people on how to think bigger. I'm going to take one of my favorite innovations of all times, and it's an ordinary innovation, and yet I think that's what makes it so special. It's one of those rare innovations that everybody loves, no matter if you're rich or poor, no matter where you are in the globe, and I have yet to find a single politician who can critique it. And I'm talking about ice cream. In 1790, the first president of the United States, George Washington, spent $190 in dollars of that time on just a bucket of ice cream. Just imagine how expensive. Nancy Johnson is the person who made it possible for every single one of us to have ice cream. She was an ordinary woman in her 50s, the wife of a chemistry professor who lived in the 1800s in Philadelphia. She was a missionary. She was an abolitionist. Did she invent ice cream? No, but she made it possible for all of us to have ice cream. She invented the ice cream maker. So why was ice cream so expensive? Well, back then, you would take a big bowl, fill it with ice, and then you would take a smaller bowl, fill that with milk, and you would stir, and it's getting harder and harder and harder to stir, and it's melting, and it's forming lumps, and it's just awful. So here's the problem she's trying to solve. How do we make the making of ice cream easier? Well, what are the challenges? How do I keep it cold? How do I make the stirring process easier? How do I prevent the formation of lumps? So now let me look for ways in which I can solve each of these parts of my problem, each of these challenges. So how do I keep it cold? Well, what if I take a water pail that had already been in existence for at least 400 years, I fill that with ice, and now I'm going to put the milk in a vessel that'll keep it cold. Well, what sort of a vessel will keep milk cold? Well, back then, men would go to the tavern and have beer in pewter mugs because that would keep it cold. And I do mean men because back then only men were allowed in taverns. So let's put the milk in a pewter vessel. Now, how am I going to make the labor of stirring less arduous? Well, how about if I take a hand grinder that was already being used for grinding coffee and spices? So now I'm going to attach the spatulas to that hand grinder. But I still got to make sure that it doesn't form lumps. Well, how about if I put holes in the spatula so that the liquid goes through the holes, preventing the formation of lumps? It's believed that she learned about that from the runaway slaves from the sugar plantations, because they would often have to mix hot water with sugar really fast and prevent the formation of crystals. Well, if it could work for hot liquid, could it work for cold liquid? You put these pieces together and you have what the Library of Congress dubbed in 1843 a disruptive technology. You see, even that word is not new. Notice the process. You define the problem. You then break down that problem into its most important sub-problems. Notice how all of them are questions. Notice how I stuck to 3. If you look at any innovation from any point in time, I guarantee you almost all of them, if not all of them, will be broken down into 3 to 5 most important subparts, sub-elements. And now she searches for ways in which she can solve each of those parts of her problem, and then she imagines how to combine and recombine and recombine until she got it right. When I tell you the story, it seems simple, and it's not simple. By no means am I going to tell you it's simple, but it's doable, and if you put in the work, you can do it. Now, I could tell you about any innovation from any point in history, and you will find that the pattern is always the same. I'm going to give you just one more quick example, given all the emphasis on cars here at our forum. You know, the guy that put cars on the map was a man by the name of Henry Ford. Did he invent the car? No. Did Elon Musk invent the Tesla? No. Did Henry Ford invent the assembly line? No, it already existed. What did he do that put cars on the map? Back then, cars costed about $2,000. Yes, they were already using the assembly line, but the question was, how do we reduce the time that it takes to build a car? And how do we make it cheaper? So we had to reduce the cost of materials. So he had an engineer whom he sent far and wide to every single factory around the United States to search for ways in which we could reduce the time. And the engineer found the moving assembly line at a slaughterhouse. And when you brought the moving part in, you now reduced the time it took to build a car from 12 and a half hours to 2.5 hours. And you put the pieces together, that and painting a car only in the color black, which drives faster, now reduced the cost of the car to $350. So now we need to answer the question, how does the mind actually create these ideas? We often use the word brainstorming when we talk about the creative process, but let's open up that black box and actually look at how do we create ideas. The way to think about the mind, it's like a giant inventory system. It's an Excel spreadsheet. You're collecting different information bits into shelves across your mind. And every time I ask you a question, you then pull it out of your mind. So let's imagine I gave you this quick question. What's the answer? 60, right? You didn't have to think, it wasn't a trick question. Now, what's the answer to this question? You don't know. How come you don't know? Because you don't have the pieces in your mind. Now, if I asked you, what's a word that rhymes with airplane that's not a real word? Store lane, crow lane. What did you do there? You simply said, well, a word that rhymes with airplane has to end with the sound ain, and then I got to put a sound in front of it and make a combination that doesn't exist in the English language. So I compare it against my knowledge of the English language. You did the same process when you were doing 28 plus 32. You went into your memory bank, searched for 28, the plus, the 32, made the connection. Notice how you're doing the same process whether you're doing a mathematical question or a so-called creative task. There is no difference between creative versus analytical tasks. They're the same. Take a look at what happens when you take physicists or scientists and creative people and you put them under an MRI machine. There is no such thing as a creative or an analytical type. In fact, there's no such thing as the right portion of your brain and the left portion of your brain. All portions of your brain are activated, whether you're doing a so-called logical or a so-called creative task, because they're one and the same. Despite all the emphasis on saving Einstein's brain and studying it, it turns out that the real answer to how he got his best ideas was his time as a patent officer, where he got to examine thousands and thousands of patents. And he had the opportunity to create for himself patents like typewriters, cameras, refrigeration, even an interesting blouse. He himself says that was the moment where he hatched his most beautiful ideas. All creative thought comes from learning and memory. Now, I'm running out of time, but what we do is we teach people how to create these flashes of insight. And the way you create flashes of insight is you need the pieces and you need to be able to connect the pieces. And what I do is I teach people how to do that. I supercharge the mind to do that. And I teach people how to use something called a choice map. And the choice map looks like this. It's just like what you did with Nancy Johnson. You define the problem, you break it down, and for each sub-problem, you go out into the world and you search for different ways in which that problem has been solved. And we teach you techniques for searching. And now you take those different options that you've discovered and you combine them and recombine them and you imagine all the different possibilities. In fact, in our simple choice map, you can generate up to 3,125 unique solutions. As the great French polymath Henri Poincaré once wrote, invention consists of avoiding the constructing of useless combinations, and consists of the constructing of useful combinations, which are an infinite minority. To invent is to discern, to choose. Allow me to propose a corollary, which is to choose is to invent. You can use the choice map, a very deliberative, structured approach, to create meaningful choices, and in so doing, become better choosers. We have used this method not just to train students, but we even used it during COVID, where the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation created the Wisdom Council. And to give you just one example, remember the ventilator crisis? We took one company that had a 3D printer and combined it with the technology of another company that had a snorkeling mask, and they created a temporary breathing machine with a snorkeling mask with an embedded 3D printed valve, which ended up saving many lives. So my dream is to empower people to think bigger in order that we can make a better world. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think we have time for just a question or two. Is there a question on the floor? If there is not, I will go to the app. But I'm not going to lie, I'm a little surprised. Oh, there's one over here? There's one over here. You're all such a good society. There's the raised hand. It was off in the periphery on the left side. Sir, your question.
Thanks, Sheena, a lot for your presentation. I was just wondering a general question, like you being blind, how do you think it has helped you see better?
Oh, that's a great question. I've had to figure it out. So, you know, when you're growing up blind, most of the time people say things are just not possible. And so my job was to figure out how to make the possible, how to make what people thought was impossible possible. And I essentially intuitively created this method, but then found that there was evidence in science as well.
One more question over here on the right. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you.
Over here on the far right side, there's a question.
Yeah, hello, and thanks for the nice presentations in the morning and now today. So I'm Sam from Salamander. So my question is rather a Nordic one. How do you distinguish great ideas from great communications, where you Americans excel?
Notice that the definition I gave you was very precise. So I do talk about how to communicate an idea as well. That's something that I call the third eye. That's also part of the method. But the ideation process, notice it was very structured. Problem, break it down. Here are the options. You had to have evidence for each option, having evidence behind why it was successful, and you're only combining pieces that you already know to work. And so the novelty comes from the fact that you're combining things that are unexpected.
Gosh, I'm afraid that's all the time we have, but let me just say, fantastic talk. Thanks for helping us think bigger.
Thank you.
Sheena Iyengar.
Thank you.